and how our unspoken values impact our relationships. So before I kind of move on to some of the other content that I'm going to include, I do want to talk about conflict and hot buttons and how they impact our lives and how they happen. So conflict is not a bad thing. I'm an introvert, a fairly strong introvert, and so I have a tendency of getting flustered when someone has a lot of emotion coming at me. And so I've generally thought that conflict is bad. It's taken one of my best friends who is an attorney, a trained attorney anyway, she no longer practices, to kind of break me of those habits. And one of the things that we talked about a lot is conflict. And we all have conflict, whether it's internal conflict or external conflict. We all have it. You know, a conflict could be, you and your spouse or partner want to go to different restaurants. That could be a very simple conflict, and how you resolve that can either hinder or encourage and deepen your relationship. Hot buttons are, I'll say, an escalation of those kind of conflicts where something gets pressed in our psyche or our emotions and we levitate. We shoot off like rockets and it's no good for anyone involved. So I believe that hot buttons come from a few different places of intersection. So I'm always fascinated by how things work. So I was reading an email yesterday, and it talked about this intersection of unhealed wounds and bad habits and unresolved conflicts, and how those can create issues in our lives. And as I was thinking about this presentation, I was like, oh, yes, our hot buttons are those places where our unhealed wounds or bad habits, unresolved conflicts come into play with what then creates conflict, which is unmet needs of some kind, potentially limited resources or perceived limited resources, and differing values. And so what I'm going to talk about today are one of the things that we can do in terms of self-awareness and self-discovery. We're going to talk about values. And so if you are on a computer, if you can have the values assessment that I sent, that Gwen sent out earlier for you guys, if you can have that open behind your Zoom screen, that would be great. We're going to get there in some moments here. But yeah, so conflict is caused essentially by unmet needs, limited resources, and differing values. And how those interplay with our unhealed wounds and unresolved conflict and bad habits is what can create these hot buttons. So let's do a quick poll to get you guys involved, because I can't see your faces. I can only see my screen. Type 1 in the chat box if you know your top 3 values, and type 2 in the chat box if you are unsure of your top 3 values. All right, I'm seeing all 2s so far. Okay. Well, great. Hopefully you get to learn something today about yourself. All right, I'm going to minimize that. Right. So let's jump into what values are. They are, in really basic terms, the set of beliefs or ideas that direct how we live. They're, in some ways, an expression of our motivations, or they could be our motivations. Each person has a unique set of values that influences their thoughts, actions, and then motivation. And even our emotions too. I should have included that as well. The thing to note is that values can change over time in stressful situations or after a major life event. So as we grow older, as we grow more wise, our values can shift and change. After we get married or divorced, have children, have a parent pass away, all of these major life events can also have propel a shift in our values. And in stressful situations, some of our, I'll say, not strong values. So if we have a top 3 or a top 5 set of values, we still have other values that might come into play. And in stressful situations, some of those other values can raise their heads. I believe that values are different from priorities. Our demonstrated priorities are how we live out our values. So I often hear people say that family is a value for them. But I think in most cases, family could be an expression or a priority of a value. So relationships, dignity, love, some of those things. So there might be something underneath. If you say family is a value, why do you think it's a value? And so if there are different words that come up for you with that, then family might be a priority, and those other words are potentially your values. All right, so poll number 2. How would knowing your values be helpful for your life? You can write a short phrase, a word or two. Yeah, so how to prioritize everything, help set goals, understand my emotions and reaction better, help define my goals, make it easier to eliminate things. Huzzah, because we all need that, I think. So many things on our plates. Stay focused and not worry about the small things, increase emotional intelligence, help it work. Use it for decision making, help build and understand relationships. Awesome. You guys are fierce this afternoon. Way to go. Where's my cursor? So yes, all of those things. Values help us understand ourselves and what's important to us. So this understanding ourselves and what's important to us. One of the things that I deeply care about, which ties into one of my high values, is having people be able to use their voice, to be able to, whether it's stand up for themselves, set boundaries, express what's important to them. I love to help people with that. And I want to encourage that as much as possible. So in terms of values, they help us understand what's important to us and then can give us the language that we might need in order to share that. As I said before, I'm an introvert. And so I'm not really, in all honesty, I'm not that great on the fly, especially when I'm surprised by something. It can be a train wreck. But as I do self-discovery and self-awareness exercises, when I remember the language that I've created, it then helps me communicate that better. Knowing our values helps us improve our self-awareness. I saw a summary of a study and I couldn't find the original document. The company had been bought by another company. So for those of you who care about first source materials, I'm sorry, I can't quote that, but I do have a secondary source. And it said that only 20% of female leaders are self-aware. For men, it was terrible. It was like a statistical, plus or minus, where it was 4%. So basically, we all need help with self-awareness and potentially emotional intelligence. Under this idea of understanding ourselves and what is important to us also comes, as I alluded to earlier, knowing our values provides a framework for evaluating our behavior and emotions. It helps us know what our motivation is, why we care about certain things, why we get upset about certain things. It gives us a framework. And in terms of helping us understand others, knowing our values can help us increase effective dialogue. We all don't share the same values. And I think that's something that we can forget. Like, I care very much about this, so you should too. We all have it. And so to be aware enough that other people might have different values can help us understand them, where they're coming from. It can provide opportunity for a deepening relationship, where when someone that we're talking to disagrees with us, we can ask them questions. And one of the terms that I use on a fairly regular basis is holding things loosely. So if you look at your hands and you clench them like this, we can't receive or give anything, right? But when our hands are open like this, we can freely give and receive. And so when we know our values and remember that other people might have different values, that helps us hold things a bit loosely. Not that we're holding our values loosely, but that we understand that other people don't value the same things. And therefore, there needs to be conversation that happens in one way, shape, or form. Knowing our values helps us, when we're in times of conflict, realize that maybe this person isn't actually attacking me. Brene Brown, in one of her books, talks about a crappy first draft. And I think she got that from Anne Lamott. And I'm not sure what Anne Lamott called it. But it's that first conversation that you create in your head for why someone is doing something, what they're doing, how they're doing it, and who it involves. And often that first draft that we create in our heads is 100% wrong. And so if we're self-aware and understand our values, we can say, oh, they have different values than me. And it gives us an opportunity to demonstrate compassion for ourselves and for other people. And then decision making. Our values can help us determine our priorities, help set our schedules, our calendars, what we volunteer for. It can really provide a framework for how we organize our lives if we want to take it that far. And then the last thing I have here is it helps us be open to and respect or honor different people and ways of doing things. And that's even when we don't, agree. And that can be a bit hard, especially if we're stressed or really, really passionate about something. And yet we're all different. And so again, I come back to this idea of holding things loosely. All right. So that was a lot. I just spewed a lot of words at you. Does anybody have any questions? And I guess if you could put them in the chat, I'll wait about a minute and see if any questions come up from what we've talked about so far. Okay. I'm not seeing any questions. And so if there is one that pops up, Well, I've got a Q&A time at the end, so we'll keep it there. All right, and moving to the next slide. So as we all know, these hot button issues that get us all feisty and fiery, it's not necessarily a bad thing because it means that we care. And yet, they can do some pretty significant damage in terms of our relationships. And when we don't know our values or can't articulate them or speak them in a way that that is clear or gives voice to who we are, it provides a difference or a disagreement that can separate people. When we don't know our values, we can fall into the trap of believing everyone values the same thing we do. In terms of self-awareness, it keeps our motivations opaque or hidden from us. They live in our subconscious and don't come out into our consciousness. When we don't know our values, we don't provide a space or framework to observe and evaluate our emotions and reactions. And then, as I was saying about Brene Brown and Anne Lamott, there's the storytelling aspect of things, the why, who, what, and how. And that initial storytelling is usually incorrect. We make up something like, oh, they must not like us, or, they're out to get us. I can't believe that person did that. They're so inconsiderate. Those kind of things are that first draft story. And when we notice ourselves telling a first draft story, we can take a step back and be like, ooh, what got me all upset here? And then one of the first things we can look at are our values. And then when we know our values, and we've talked a little bit about this already, they can give us lenses to evaluate things. I always love being in meetings where everyone has a pair of glasses on. Well, at least pre-COVID when we were in person, because the best thing to make this an example is to have you take off your glasses and then move them to the next person. We can't see very well, right? When we have someone else's glasses on. And values give us a clear way of seeing ourselves and others so that we can make values-informed decisions, remember what's important to us, observe and evaluate our emotions and reactions, be compassionate with ourselves. So when we do get fired up about something, that it's not like, oh, I can't believe that I did that. It can be, oh, I must really care about this. Why is that? What am I trying to tell myself? And then also take other people's values into consideration when there is disagreement, rewriting the story. And then we can find solutions based on values, which is a win-win. And the other person or people involved don't have to necessarily know their values. We can ask questions in building relationships in this way to say, well, what's important to you about this? What's the most important factor in this decision? We can ask questions so that we can kind of figure out what their values are without them stopping and saying, these are my top 5 values. Now, I'm a fairly direct communicator where if I have something to say, I will say, these are my top 5 values, and you're stepping on all of them. So I'm getting a little upset right now. But not everybody's like that. So there are ways to find out other people's values without them needing to be direct about it, and give people the opportunity to share what's important to them and be heard. Because I believe that, especially in our society now, that's one of the things that we're all missing, the opportunity to be heard and deeply heard, like have someone focus on us, that they're not developing their response to us as we're talking. It's really a deep listening that honors people. And so these are all the things that values give us. So here are some examples of values: authenticity, faith, beauty, creativity, openness, teamwork, wholeness, uniqueness. These I pulled from the PDF that you have. So you can see that there's lots of different things. And I also want to say that if, as you're going through the list and you feel like there's a word that's not on there that is a high value for you, you can write that down. That's okay, because these lists are not exhaustive. We'd probably have every single word in the English language on the paper. At least that's, an adjective maybe. In a full values list. So I picked the ones that I see most often, and you can feel free to add if you notice that there's not one that's really important to you. And so with the PDF that you've got, we're going to take 5 minutes. And so at 12:31, I'll start talking again. And I want you to identify your top 5 values from the list that I've given. And then we're going to go on. And the top 5 could be really hard. You might start out with 20. So see how you can whittle it away. And maybe some of the words that you picked go underneath one of the major values. But yeah, so just take 5 minutes, and I'm going to put my camera on stop video, and we'll come back at 12:31. All right, so it's 12:31. If you'd like to put in the chat whether that was easy, medium, or hard for you to go through the list. All right, so it looks like most of the people said either medium or hard, with one person saying easy, which is fantastic. And keep in mind on the instructions on the second page, I gave you 5 minutes, but you could take, up to 20 minutes to do this, along with steps 2 and 3 that are there. And yeah, this is I'll say the first step, narrowing it down. And then the second step is, here we go. Then defining the values. What do these words mean and why are they important? So to use myself as an example, one of my top values is dignity. And when I did this exercise, one of the first times that I've done it, I had words like dignity, respect, honor, integrity as part of, I'll say, my first 20 words that I circled in this. And then I had to narrow it down. And when I started defining the values of identifying, okay, well, what does dignity mean to me? I noticed that my definition had respect, honor, and integrity included in it. So all of those things are important to me, but the main value is dignity. How are we treating others? Are they able to have voice? Are they able to express who they are and are treated with respect and honor? So that's one example of how defining the values can help you identify maybe your top 3 even, and that some of the words that you circled might be part of another value. And the second question, why are they important, is part of the self-reflection where you can take some time and think about, well, why is this really important to me? For me, dignity is really important because we are all human beings with inherent worth and value. And so when we don't treat people with dignity, we are telling them that they don't have worth and they don't have value. And you want to see something that makes me levitate? Yeah, it's that. And we all have our things. So those are identify your top 5 values, define the values, and then I have some additional reflection questions here. You do have some on the instructions on the back of the value sheet as well. So questions like how do these values impact who and how I am in the world? How will I honor my values in my actions and interactions with people? Where in my life have I seen these values come into play? Whether experience, conflict, frustration, joy, the list can go on and on. And these reflection questions are a way that we can give ourselves compassion and also then extend compassion to other people. And then I call this a values practice. like people have yoga practices or meditation practices, prayer practices, where we need to do something on a regular basis, whether it's daily, weekly. And so in order to keep our values kind of in the front of our mind, here's a practice that you could do of writing them out every day or speaking them aloud with the definitions and why they're important to you. Reminding yourself of your values helps give this framework to how you might react to something, and then also give you the opportunity to step away for a moment and frame how you want to respond to something. And then the second is practice living into them. So when you know what your values are and you've defined them and are remembering them on a regular basis, you can live into them. And I have in parentheses, or tone them down depending on the situation. One of my high values is also efficiency. And yes, they conflict. So at the beginning, I talked about internal and external conflict. My values can conflict with one another, dignity and efficiency. And there are times when I tread on my dignity value because of efficiency. And sometimes my efficiency value needs to be toned down depending on the situation. So like if I'm in a meeting and we get off topic, it's not an effective use of my time. I get impatient. I want to bring the conversation back around, which is okay in some instances. But then there are others where something else needs to be addressed and it's important before we can get to the other thing. And so I need to tone down my high value of efficiency. Another one of my values is accuracy. And I've really had to tone that down in lots of different places because nobody likes to be corrected. And so, I've created this filter where, when I notice someone says something wrong, I go through this mental checklist in my head. Okay, is it a huge thing that needs to be corrected now? Can it wait till later? Was he just mistaken, or she just mistaken? All those kind of things. And if I decide that it's important, then I'll say something. But yeah, just randomly interrupting people because I noticed they said something wrong or whatever it might be also treads on my dignity value. And so which one do I want to be most important in certain situations? Right. So when we're talking about hot buttons, which are certainly influenced by our values, we really need to decide what is most important, which goes to my example just a second ago. And so these 3 questions are taken from the book Crucial Conversations. You can see the note there. So we can ask ourselves, in this situation, what do I want for myself? What do I want for others? And the interesting and potentially most transformative question is, what do I want for this relationship? And whether we're talking about social media or political discourse, religious discourse, things that just have a tendency of raising our blood pressure, we tend to often answer the what do I want for myself question, and sometimes forget the what do I want for others question, and often forget what do I want for this relationship question. Because if we want the relationship to deepen and be stronger and those kind of things, telling someone they're wrong or getting upset about something that doesn't super impact the two of you in the conversation is not great for the relationship. So having these filters of what do I want for myself, what do I want for others, and what do I want for this relationship can be really, really helpful. And also provide an opportunity for both self-reflection, self-awareness, development, and compassion. And so that was in the blurb, I'll call it, about this, talked about 3 things that you'd get from this workshop. The list of values to use in self-discovery, identifying how the values can help and hinder in relationships, and then steps and options to give ourselves compassion. And so I've tried to weave those 3 things throughout the presentation. And this is a great way to develop compassion for ourselves. And it also gives us the opportunity to give ourselves voice in the first question. What do I want for myself? All right, so it's 12:42. So I want to open it up to any questions. And I called it Q&A, but it's questions and opinions. They're my opinions. So does anyone have any questions?
Karen, this is Becky. Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi, Becky.
Hi. That was great. Thank you. I do have a question. I'm just wondering, in your work as a coach, do you find, on the subject of compassion, do you find that folks that you work with have a harder time with compassion for others or compassion for themselves? Or isn't it something that you really notice?
I think my people anyway, because I work with leaders and they're highly motivated and that can often be other focused. They, at least the people I've worked with so far, tend to be more compassion focused externally. And they have a hard time giving themselves compassion, whether it's that shows up in a day off or if they've done something wrong, they beat themselves up about it. It's much easier for them to give compassion to others as opposed to themselves.
Thank you.
You're welcome. What other questions do we have? That was a lot of information. And so I realized you might have some questions that pop up later. In 2 slides, my email will be there along with my contact information. So you can get a hold of me that way as well.
I have a question, Karen. This is Sarah.
Hi, Sarah.
Hi. I mean, there definitely has to be some situations where opposing values are going to lead to either the not starting a relationship with someone or ending a relationship. And I know it's different, whether you have to work with the person every day or if it's like a friend and stuff like that. And I was just wondering if you could talk on that where, you just can't, it's just too opposing and you just can't get over that, or how to try to find a way to deal with that.
Yeah, we're always going to have people in our lives that we don't like. And I think if it's a matter of like the person is immoral or lies on a regular basis or is doing things that are illegal, it is appropriate to sever the relationship, I think, especially if we're talking about a work environment. And also work environments can be a bit helpful in terms of having an overall kind of company or organizational value set. So if you're in leadership and you have a values list or some kind of core values that you tell your employees, that seems to me to be grounds to have a conversation. Like, look, you're not meeting these values. This is how you can change. And if you don't change, then you need to go. You will be released to industry, as a book I read. But in terms of our personal relationships, if you notice that you are not able to self-regulate, you might just not need to be around them very much. And this is where counseling might be really helpful. Coaching can do a lot of self-discovery work, but there's it goes into where counseling might be an effective way of dealing with this kind of thing. So does that help? Lots of options, depending on how strong the situation is.
Hi, Karen. This is Jessica. How are you?
Good.
Great. It wasn't really a question. I had just more of kind of a comment or an observation, but I really loved how at the beginning of the presentation, you talked about the fact that our values change over time. And even just looking through this list, and way for me personally, even picking the top 5 and certainly the top 10, you can see where there's 1 or 2 that hold on, but then big life changes, marriage, death in the family, retirement, having children, all those things. It's amazing how much they can impact you when you can really see that change in your set of values. So I think it's really important and impactful to recognize that doing this exercise over time, every once in a while, is beneficial. That's all.
Yeah. Definitely. Yeah. Thanks for sharing that. That was one of my, I'll say, unspoken assumptions. Thanks for giving that voice. Anyone else have any questions?
Karen,
So
it's Gwen. I do have one quick question.
Oh, sure.
Do you have any tips that we can use to de-escalate a situation? Like if something gets heated very quickly, like do you have any tips to kind of, just rather than say, okay, we can agree to disagree, do you have any ways to, de-escalate a situation if you know that a conversation, especially in the workplace, is getting, heated?
Yes. And this is hard because when that happens, our adrenal system and all of our body sends adrenaline in, and it shuts off our thinking parts of our brain where, we want to fight or flight or freeze. And if we can be self-regulated enough, that's a great time to ask questions or point out something that you're noticing. So let's say someone starts to get really upset and you're like, wow, that's an interesting reaction that I wasn't expecting. Or even if you were expecting it, you can say, you seem to be really passionate about this. What is important to you in this discussion? And it's amazing how that can take people aback. Because the last thing I think you want to do is enter into, he said, she said, sparring matches with people. That's, so asking questions is a great way to de-escalate. And sometimes if the person is just ramping up, or you feel like you're ramping up and there's no way to get out of it, go to the restroom. Be like, you know what? I'm sorry, I need to use the bathroom. That way it'll give you a moment. You can take a breath. And if somebody says, no, you can't go to the bathroom during this, then they have other issues and there may need to be a severing of the relationship or a conversation about boundaries. So does that help?
Yes, it does.
Because as I made as kind of an offhand comment, people want to be heard. And so if there is an argument or disagreement and it seems to be escalating, it may be that the person doesn't feel valued or doesn't feel heard. And if we can make that happen for the other person, then the conflict may go away. And then I think we all know sometimes people are just jerks. So we just have to deal with that too. All right, so I want to offer you a special offer for those of you that would like to explore your values and how they impact your life. If you sign up for coaching, you can get a 20% discount on this special package, which is specifically around self-awareness and values. And you can go to our website, dreambigcoachingllc.com, and get started. The 4 sessions are to be held in May and June in 2021. And I think there's a lot of self-discovery that can be done around values and self-awareness and can be really helpful in the workplace. And so I wanted to provide an offer for you all specifically in the event that you wanted to do some more work in this area. And then, thank you for your time and your attention. If you want to get a hold of me, here's my info.
Well, thank you very much, Karen. I think we all learned a lot here. There's a lot of information there. And like you said, if anybody needs to get in touch with you, your information is here. I'll also have your information too. So if anybody doesn't have this and they want to get a hold of the chamber, I can get you in touch with Karen. I also want to say thank you to Jamie Rhodes and Servium Construction LLC for being our sponsor again. So really appreciate Servium and Jamie doing this for us. And again, thank you to Karen. I feel like we should all give you a virtual round of applause. But we really do appreciate you coming here today and sharing with us.
Yeah. If any of you who run your own companies or, have a department that you think this would be valuable to share with them, please let me know. I love helping people discover this kind of thing, and it can be expanded so that there's more time for reflection and conversation around the values list itself. So thanks. This is great. As you can tell, I love talking about this. So thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Have a great day, everyone. And if anybody needs anything, just get in touch with me.
Take care.
Thank you.